From the Dominion Post, in Morgantown, West Virginia, this is the Postcast, the audio companion to the Dominion Post newspaper. In this episode, an Ohio fugitive is arrested in Morgantown, an employment dispute between Kingwood and Preston County is settled, and Monongalia County schools adjust to the governor's latest order. I'm your host, Chris Schultz, and these are the week's top stories. On Tuesday, the U.S. Marshal Service's Mountain State Fugitive Task Force found and arrested a man wanted for murder in Ohio. The suspect had been on the run from authorities for nearly 2 years. I'm joined now by Dominion Post Cops and Courts reporter Will Dean. Can you tell us, Will, how was this fugitive apprehended in Morgantown, of all places?
So he's wanted out of Ohio, and I was speaking with the acting chief deputy U.S. Marshal for Northern District of West Virginia, and he said that the Ohio marshals who are working the case received a tip that he might be in Morgantown, and they passed the information along to West Virginia marshals, who were able to confirm his location, conduct surveillance, and arrest him.
Well, that's certainly a relief to all the citizens of the area, but can you clarify for us again just what exactly this suspect was wanted for?
So he's accused of participating in a murder in Akron, Ohio on July 1st, 2018. Another person actually shot the victim first, and then while the victim is on the ground, this man is alleged to have walked up and shot him 4 times in the back.
Wow, so pretty obvious there why the Marshal Service was so interested in finding this guy. But you did mention there that this incident occurred in 2018. Is it common for fugitives to be on the run for what is now at this point nearly 2 years?
I don't know if it's common, but I do know that the Marshal Service considers anything over, or any fugitive who's been on the run for more than a year is considered a cold case. And, you know, this is the first time West Virginia marshals have worked on the case, but he said he's believed that Ohio has received information before and just never quite been able to close that last little distance and get the guy.
Will, now that this suspect is in custody, how will his case proceed, and what kind of impact is this fugitive situation going to have on that case and potentially even his sentencing?
I'm not really familiar enough to say how that would impact it or what his case will do in Ohio, but I do know that he will be sent to Ohio, and the other person who was involved in that murder has been sentenced to life without prison. So it certainly doesn't look good for him.
Well, Will, thank you so much for bringing us this interesting little crime tidbit here, a non-coronavirus story to break up the monotony. And thanks so much for calling in and talking to me about it today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad that, you know, this guy's not going to put us at risk anymore.
Last week, the city of Kingwood and a former officer agreed to settle the city's complaint over his departure from the force. But that complaint points to an issue with a broader impact than Preston County. I'm joined now by Dominion Post regional editor Kathy Plum. Kathy, before we get into the details of the settlement here, I was hoping that you could clarify for us what exactly is at issue with this hiring and reshuffling of employees between the city and the county.
Kingwood, like many small towns across the nation, is having trouble keeping certified employees. Police officers is a big one. Another big one is certified water plant operators. So to try and remedy that, the municipality of Kingwood now asks new police officers to sign a contract saying that if the city pays for their training so that they become a certified officer, the officer will work a set amount of time for the city. If he or she leaves before that contract is expired, it calls for them to repay the town the expenses of training.
So obviously finding someone who's already certified as an officer, as you said, can be difficult, but why is Kingwood even paying for these trainings in the first place?
The way the West Virginia Academy for Police is set up, which is at the State Police Academy, you cannot just go and apply for training. You must already be hired by a city, a county, a state agency then you can apply for training. The exception is a new program by Fairmont State, which will allow some students to go through as part of their whole criminal justice training. But for most of us, if we don't have a job already as a police officer, we can't go to the training.
Okay. So I'm just going to lay this out just to make sure that we are all on the same page here. Basically what happened was this officer was hired, untrained. Kingwood paid for their training as well as equipment necessary for that training and a salary during that training period. And very soon after the training and the certification was completed, that officer went with that investment from the city and moved on to the county sheriff's office. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what resolution, what compensation was the city seeking, and what is the settlement actually led to be?
The city sought to have the $1,500 for tuition and the training expenses and the officer's salary. Eventually, they seemed to settle for less than that. The sheriff of Preston County, Dan Lockery, has agreed that he and his department will pay the $1,500 training fee to the city, and Officer Knotts has agreed that he will pay $582.09, which comes to a total of $2,082. So initially, the city asked for $5,600, so I'm guessing that the salary for the officer is not included. We had, at this point, not yet been able to obtain a copy of the contract. We were refused by the attorneys, both for the city and for the officer.
Okay, well, hopefully at some point we'll get a chance to look at that document. But Kathy, at the top of this segment, you did mention that this is a much broader issue than just Kingwood versus Preston County. Is there any kind of resolution in the works here in West Virginia or maybe somewhere else in the country to this issue of hiring away certified employees?
The state of South Carolina has a law which requires any city, county organization that hires away a trained personnel from another organization to pay that training cost back to the agency they hired from. And it's prorated according to how long the officer or trained person worked. The city of Kingwood voted to approach the West Virginia Municipal League and ask it to use its lobbying power in the state legislature to get something similar passed in West Virginia. That's still some time off, of course. The legislature won't meet till January, and everything's kind of in an uproar. But I think it becomes more important when you look right now, all cities and counties and the state and federal government are seeing a big change in their financial status. Kingwood recently put a freeze on non-essential expenses. There's a question whether that fourth police officer they want to get, they'll be able to afford it in the new fiscal year. We've seen it in Morgantown, in Mon County. Every dollar is going to count more and more for these agencies.
Right. We might say to ourselves, as citizens, as lay people, $2,000 shouldn't matter that much to a city government's bursar's office, but at the end of the day, especially in the situation that we find ourselves, that is likely to be a big difference. So, Kathy, I look forward to seeing how this one progresses as it moves through, hopefully, the West Virginia State House there. Thank you so much for talking to us about this today.
It's good to be here.
West Virginia schools were set to reopen next week, but on Tuesday, Governor Jim Justice announced that all schools in the state will remain closed and continue distance learning for the remainder of the school year. I'm joined now by Dominion Post reporter Jim Bissett. Jim, what has the response been from Monongalia County schools to Tuesday's announcement?
I don't think officials weren't surprised by it. They were, in fact, pretty relieved by it because, as the county superintendent here, Dr. Eddie Campbell, told me, it took the pressure off. He said this way we could focus on getting through the remainder of this year with all the online delivery of instruction, which he says is going pretty well. This way you don't have to worry about sending students back, in the midst of the pandemic, and you focus on the coming year. You get through the summer, you focus on the fall and the first day of school, and you hope that you have a lot smoother ride in the fall.
Right, and we all certainly hope that we're back to regular classroom instruction by then. But can you tell me a little bit more about the distance learning that you mentioned just then?
Yeah, most of the county's 11,000 students, at least in grades 3 through 12, they're all issued laptops, the Google Chromebooks. It's a mix of, text on the screen, interactive videos. They work on assignments every single day, or at least, throughout the week. I am told by students and principals and administrators that it's going pretty well. It's been pretty effective, and nobody seems to be losing any steps there.
And certainly instruction is a crucial part of school, but the social aspect of school and all the different activities and events that kids get to take part in, and nobody's more impacted by this distance learning than the class of 2020, the senior class. You actually were able to speak to a couple seniors. How has this impacted them in their senior year?
They feel pretty lost. I know I talked to one kid who just said, hey, senior year's gone. Because whether or not, if you're a cool kid or if you're a star, if you're an academic star, or if you're just a kid who just is there, it's still your year. It's your senior year. And you've got prom, you've got sporting events, you've got all kinds of stuff going on. You get to swagger in the hallway a little bit just because you're a senior. And all that aspect has been taken away from them. So it's been a disappointment in that regard.
You mentioned some of those events like prom that have been canceled because of coronavirus and distancing, but the governor in particular highlighted graduation as something that he would like to see happen later in the summer, if possible, when distancing requirements are lifted. You actually wrote a story earlier this week about some contingency plans in case that is not possible. What are some of the contingency plans that the county has considered?
Yeah, again, the county is really, the district has really grappled with this. It's been such a dilemma for them. What officials did, they got together, they came up with four options, three of which have aspects of that whole, the human component that goes into a high school graduation. And really, I think they did the best with what they had to work with. So the first option would be, I call it a drive-by diploma grad, where you roll up to the parking lot in your school, you're in your cap and gown, you step out of your car, and for an official presentation by the principal, he hands you your diploma, you get your photograph taken by a professional photographer, and you drive away. So the second option would be a somewhat traditional gathering in the school auditorium where you do get to walk across that stage and have your diploma handed to you. But the caveat is that you're going to do that to empty seats in the auditorium because your parents, family members wouldn't be allowed to be there because of social distancing. The third option, the principal or assistant principal would come to your house, personally deliver your diploma to you, present it to you. But it would have to be outside of your home, like in your front yard or your driveway. The idea for those three being that with Facebook Live and all the social media options that would go with these options, and that you could beam it out to families, to your family members near and far, and people would at least be able to see it on a computer monitor. So the fourth option is just pure pandemic social distancing, where you would receive your diploma by certified mail, and that would be it.
So Jim, obviously we all want to see a return to some semblance of normalcy and hopefully watch those seniors walk across the stage, but as of right now it's indeterminate when that might be able to happen. Has there been any indication from the county as to when they might consider announcing their final decision for graduation ceremonies?
No decision yet. I know I talked to Dr. Campbell earlier this week, and he likes the idea of having the deferred ceremonies for all three high schools. But he said, we can't do anything yet until we know that things are going to be safe, and nobody knows that yet for sure.
All right, well, Jim, I'm sure we'll be talking again as we hear more from the schools and more about the graduation plans. Thank you so much for calling in and talking with us today about this.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me, and stay safe out there.
You too. That's all for this week's episode. The links to all the stories we discuss are also in the description of this episode on your podcasting app. If you haven't already, subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We would also really appreciate it if you would take the time to rate and review us. Nobody's exactly sure why, but a rate and a review combo really goes a long way to boost the show. Be sure to check out our sports podcast, Best of 7. Andrew and Sean are now putting out new episodes every week. You can also check out our local history podcast, All About History. Episode 3, all about the Confederate raid on Morgantown during the Civil War, is up now. We want to hear from you. Do you like the show? Do you hate the sound of my voice? Is it too loud? Is it too quiet? Let me know. Email podcast@dominionpost.com. Or you can reach out on any of the Dominion Post social media. We're Dominion Post, WV, on Twitter, Dominion Post _WV on Instagram, or go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Dominion Post WV. Tweet directly at me if you like. I'm at Schultz Reports on Twitter. That's SCHULZ. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Wash them hands.